making a point by using a story.
You know, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
Get your questions answered by Deb and Jen.
Deb and Jen are at it again.
Okay, welcome to the Deb and Jen Show. I'm Coach Deb.
And guess who I am? I'm Coach Jen.
Yeah, that's why we have those names there, just to clue you in. Don't get mixed up. Anyway, we don't have a specific agenda today. We're hoping people pop in with questions, and we can take some of the questions that we get by email as well. But both of us are headed to a big virtual stage next week to give some presentations, do some speaking. So we thought, hey, why don't we share some of our thoughts around how do you prepare for big events like this? What mindset do you have to be in? How do you deal with the confusion, the chaos, the overwhelm, things that creep in?
The feeling of like, I don't have everything ready. Is there more stuff I should know about? Right. Yeah, it's normal.
Exactly. How am I ever going to remember all of this? Certainly not memorize all of this, because that never comes off well. So yeah, I thought we'd share some ideas with you. And there's something I've been talking about all week with lots of my clients, and that is inserting stories into our presentations and making a point by using a story, like even if it's a case study or something in an article that you've read. So I've been looking at ways to do that as we prepare for next week. We're each giving 4 or 5 presentations at the event we're going to on one of those big stages. In fact, next week, I think we're going to broadcast live from the place and show you around for those who might be ready to start delivering big virtual events. Doesn't even have to be that big, could be 50 people, but what it's like and what you have in front of you. So let's talk about storytelling for a second, because I believe that we should all have a storytelling journal. And what that means is you write down stories of things that have happened to you or happened to your clients or happened to other people that you know, something you read about in the news. You can tell the story of that, because even if it's not your story necessarily, people can relate to stories. In fact, if you look at the word history, it has the word story right in it. Our entire history is made up of stories, right? It's our shared humanity. And if we share something like, oh, last week when I was driving to the grocery store, I was really impatient. I honked at this guy trying to turn left, and I realized it was an older gentleman, and I felt really bad. I could tweak a couple of different lessons from that story for uses at different times. So it really, really helps to keep a story journal so that you can insert these when you're writing an email or when you're doing a social media post, or in this case, like for Jen and me, heading down to South Carolina next week to use in our presentations. People recognize themselves in the stories that we tell, and therefore they lean. Oh, I had once when I was in a hurry and I got on my horn and really upset someone in front of me. We all have done things like this. So they're going to lean in and they're going to relate to you. You become more relatable instantaneously. And they lean in to learn what the lesson was. So a little note of caution, though. Don't tell a story if you don't have a point.
Okay, I want to out myself here. I'd like to. This is one of the things that I love the most about you, because I self-identify as someone who honestly sucks at telling stories. Just so you know, I end most of my stories with, and that's the end.
And that's all I have to say about that.
I've gotten way better at it as I've spoken more and more.
The end.
But I just want you to know I have one friend I can think of right now. I can see his face and I know his name, but I won't say it. And this is almost a decade ago, before I learned about story structure. And he literally out of the blue, he's like, Jen, I love you, but I actually think you're like one of the worst storytellers I've ever heard. And I might have said something back and said, and that's all I have to say.
That's all I have to say.
Again. So I'm just letting you know. And if I could also just, I don't know, side note, before you and I got together today and you're like, I don't know, let's just riff on some things and we'll share what we're doing and how to prep and the nerves, etc., and the organization to be successful at this live event. I walked into my loft. I'm in a loft, you can't tell. And on my desk, haven't opened them yet. Oh, you can't even see it. Okay.
Oh, the story cubes. Yeah.
Story cubes to just practice playing story games but I'd also like you to see how much I've used them because they're still in the plastic, but it's an interesting game. I got these
Yes.
last summer in Rome to play around with storytelling. So I just like to say, if you're not good at telling stories, there's hope for you. There's books you can read, there's games you can play, and then you should listen to whatever Coach Deborah has to say. I'll teach you what not to do. And that's the end of all I have to say right now.
You held up the story cubes, which you can get on Amazon, and they're great if you want to practice with people. They're like dice. You roll them, and it could have a picture of a turtle, or it could have a picture of a lightning bolt. And whatever you get, you have to impromptu tell a story around that. You can make it up, but it gets us in the practice of telling stories, and they can become incredibly powerful. And the more facile we get at telling stories that have shared interest with our listening audience, the more effective we will be. All right. So, but let me return to don't tell a story without a point, because there's that great line in the movie where it's trains, planes, and automobiles, and
Mhm.
Steve Martin's yelling at the other guy, and other guy's rambling on and on and on, and so Steve is all frustrated and finally yells at him and says, "Stories are much more interesting when they have a point."
You know, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
Because the guy was just rambling without making a point. But it's so true as speakers. I think I've said before, but it's worth repeating. As the speaker, we have to connect the dots for people, right? We assume that they're getting what we're saying, but not always. So part of connecting the dots, because audiences get distracted, they look at their phone, they forget what you said, or they're on the last point, they haven't caught up yet. So part of our speaking toolkit is to be able to connect the dots for them, right? So in the scope of storytelling, that means anchoring the lesson. What I realized about myself is, or what on reflection, what I learned from this is, how I think this all applies to us is, like, say something that makes it relevant to them and that amplifies their understanding, right? This is so important. This is how people leave going, wow, that was amazing. I was at an event, all day event yesterday, listening to someone give a keynote speech in the middle, and it was fascinating. Probably this woman, she did a phenomenal job, probably told upwards of 10 or 12 stories within an hour. Now you may think that's a lot. Well, these are not long stories. They're like little vignettes. Like when I got on the plane, it was this, and we were driving down the highway and all the exits were closed on the other side of the highway. And I was asking myself, why are they closed? And she told the story about seeing the presidential motorcade because the president was in town and first time she's ever seen it. And she related to the point that she was sharing. My point here, see, I'm going to anchor this lesson. The stories do not have to be long. They might be interesting. It could be a story about something you heard on the news. It could be my husband and I were just lamenting we were watching the news. All the commercials, as we all know in the evening news, are flooded with drug commercials, right? And I said, does it seem to you like there's all these new drugs on the market all of a sudden? Like, why? I could turn that into a story if this had to do with my topic about how big pharma seems to be just creating endless drugs to keep us buying drugs, on drugs, et cetera. I'd have to make a point from that. But my point here is you can even be watching the news. You could be watching any commercial. You could be reading a billboard. You could have a picture from vacation where you had an aha, an insight, an awareness, an experience that may be relevant to the points that you're making. We lose so much of this without a story journal. So a story journal is just a simple little three-ring notebook, a spiral notebook, notepad, anything. You can do it online, but anchor like something that you learned, that you became aware of, and then say, what is the moral of the story? What is the lesson here that I can share with others?
I think that's the most important part about telling stories. So if
it's the only reason to tell a story.
Exactly. We probably all had that experience where you're sitting in an audience and someone is sharing a story and every word out of their mouth is, well, then I experienced this and this happened to me and I that, and then this thing happened and then I went to the hospital and then my dog, and then you're like, what is, I mean, even if you like them and you're polite, you're still wondering, like, when are they going to get to the point? How is this relevant to me?
You know, everything is not an anecdote. You have to discriminate.
And if you're telling a personal story, to Deborah's point, I want to highlight it and really drive it home, is the intention is to relate it back to the audience, help them to understand why it's relevant to them. I have had clients who love their story. They fall in love with their story and they want to tell it. And it can be long, right? And I get it. Like you got a story and you're excited about it. Lovingly, like Coach Deborah says, nobody cares. They really don't. It's not because they don't like you. They just want to figure out like, okay, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? How is it relevant to me? So please always remember, doesn't matter how great your story is if it ends with being about you and there is no tie back to why this matters for your audience.
Yeah.
So
Tie back. That's another great way of saying connect the dots. Yeah.
How are you doing?
And by the way, the stories that we're talking about, it's not you telling your life story. You know, that could be on your About Me page on your website where you share the longer version of your story and how you got into the work that you're doing, for example. But on stage, no one cares about that. Honestly, they don't. Little stories that have a human interest, like Jen said, that are relatable to their predicament or can help them solve their predicament or help them see things in a new light. The shorter, the better.
But enough about me. I hope this hasn't been boring for you. It's just that whenever I start to talk about Elaine, I always get so carried away. I lose all track of time.
So as you prepare your story, write it out, tell it, record yourself on Zoom, listen back and go, ooh, that's too long. Well, let me see how I can shorten this.
Yeah. Well, I could go on for hours, but I'd probably start to bore you. You know, I really couldn't blame Elaine. She wanted to.
I have
listen to it too. If someone else listens to it and they say something like, oh, I call this the head fake.
Oh, no, I think it's good.
They say something like, oh, I think that was really good. Thanks for sharing it with me. If you let a friend listen to your story and that's the response you get, that is a
game over.
No, that's a no. They're just being polite. So it's a way to test it also, because if you're listening to your own story, you might not be able to realize
It's just brilliant.
that it's about you and you didn't tie it back into the other party.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't
So
fall for the head fake.
stories are powerful, but only insofar as they have a point that relates to what your audience cares about.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And these days, I think stories are becoming more and more important because everyone's overloaded with information. So nobody wants to hear you talk and just drop a lot of information. They might want to hear about how you worked, what you did to discover how to move through some dilemma, because that maybe has hope or promise for them. But just having information thrown at us, it's a lot.
Like,
It's too much. It's like, yeah, exactly. It's news fest.
When they built those roads, they had no thought of drainage in mind. So we had to take a special Jeep up to the main road.
Yeah, and you can Google it too. I'll just say like there's all sorts of information out there as far as basic simple story structure.
It had a beginning, middle, and end, and it fit within the parameter.
If you just want a template, like if you want training and the nuance and the art of it, talk to Coach Deborah. Don't talk to me. I'll be by your side and hold your hand, but I would love to witness it because my experience of you is that that's one of your fortes is storytelling. And I admire that about you. So if you want the art and nuance of it, that's where you get a coach. If you just need to start with the baby step of, I don't even know how to put the pieces together. There's simple story structure all over the place you can get. So
Go read a book.
so there's that. I'm also curious, and I don't know if we're going to stay on story for another few minutes, but if anyone has questions about the upcoming, we've got a big upcoming event. I'd also like to make space and time for that as well, because it's pretty sexy and I kind of want to talk about it sometime. So Coach Deborah, would you like to bring the stories?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, we could talk about storytelling a bit, but I think those are the basics. One of the dots was, in other words, connecting the dots was get yourself or create a story journal, online or off. Sarah, you got anything to offer or questions around storytelling?
No, I think that's a phenomenal idea about the story journal, just because I think that it is something where we obviously might even find ourselves telling a good story and then think in our head, oh, I want to definitely remember this. I want to play this out more. I want to add more details to it, right? Because the more details we add to it. So yeah, I really appreciate the idea of the story. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
One thing that I did with my iPhone also is just open a notes and have put my stories in there, because I found that I'd be someplace and I'd think, oh, I have to remember that. And then I would forget, and then I would forget, and then I would forget. And I'd still have a blank piece of paper at home. So I currently have a file on my iPhone in my notes section, and it's just little simple, 3 to 5 words as a memory jogger. So I just list all my stories. And interestingly enough, at least for me, I was quite surprised that I've got lists of hundreds of ideas now. Whereas initially, I don't know how many years or decade I spent thinking, oh, I have to remember that. Oh, I have to remember that. And it just doesn't work that way for most people. So consider using the technology you have available to you to save little memory joggers for your own stories. And you'll be surprised at what you'll come up with.
Exactly. Okay, so one last thing I'll say about where to get stories if you don't feel like you have any. If you're doing discovery calls at all, talking to prospective clients, for example, or even on a meet and greet, like at a networking event, ask a question that elicits their story. So tell me about a time when it was really difficult for you to talk about your business. Might be something that I say. Or tell me what it feels like whenever you have to step out and talk about your business. They might share a story. Haha, guess what? That can now go on my story bank. Because I can say, I was speaking with someone recently who, and you tell the story of that, right? It doesn't even have to be your story. You're telling a story about a story they shared. So you can put deposits in your story bank by soliciting questions from other people that you talk to. And then that becomes interesting too. All right. So what did you want to say about prepping for heading off for our big speaking thing next week?
Well, I'm curious. What I'd like to say, like, I'd love to talk about the reality of, like, the timeline and the reality of prepping for a big event. Now, Sarah, other listeners probably have done events, right? So they may have some similar experience. But for me, I noticed that there is kind of a couple weeks out, energy starts to shift and change. My brain starts to focus. It's just the process that I go through personally to energetically prepare. Yes, of course, there's scripts. I've got all sorts of scripts on my desk and things I'm reviewing, but there's a mental mindset that allows me to be excited and look forward to walking on stage with 3,000 people, in front of the audience, and feeling like, even if I don't feel like I have everything perfect exactly the way I wanted and everything memorized, and even if, because I'm not sure I can ever get to that perfect point, I still feel excited to lean in, and I'm able to be present and serve. So I would be interested in, and I think it would help other people to be, to share what the energy feels like, and maybe some of the, like, routines or rituals that we do to get ready. Do you have, so, like, anything that comes to you that you'd like to share, Coach Deborah? I threw that in at the end.
Who are you talking to? You know, my personality style is driven by deadlines, right? Which it can be, which the upside of that is I can be very spontaneous and create on the spot. The downside of that is I can forget things to include, right? There's good news about that though, and which is always I tell my speaking clients this: the audience will never know what you left out. So we don't beat ourselves up like, oh, I forgot to. No, they're never going to know what you left out. One of the most important things we can do as a speaker before we go on stage, and this is a little bit different than a webinar or a Zoom meeting we're having, but when you're actually live and in person presenting, you got to get into state. And as Jen describes, this process begins a couple of weeks out. Like I just texted her this morning going, I'm feeling overwhelmed. What that means, the energy is building, right?
It's just building and marinating.
You can think of it as like a big release, like you're sharing all this wisdom, this information, these stories for the benefit of the audience, but you're getting yourself into state to be in the highest possible energetic that you can for that audience. Because here's a rule of thumb: our audience is never going to be any more excited than we are. They're just not. So if we're kind of like ho-hum, yeah, hi everyone, so happy to, they're going to be ho-hum.
Wow, yeah, that was amazing.
When we're excited and we're leaning in, we're sharing from our full heart, they will respond in like kind. So it's so important to get into state. And that looks differently for different people. There's the Amy Cuddy pose, I'm powerful. You can look that up. She did a whole TED talk on getting into state. It could be listening to music. Like you'll see athletes sometimes with headphones on, they're listening to their song that pumps them up. Whatever it is for you to get into your state, to be present, to be in a serving orientation, because you're right, Jen, it's not about us, it's about the audience. Whatever we can do, you want to, there's the slow ramp up like 2-3 weeks before. Some people may start preparing way before that. And then there's the ramp up just before you speak. I do breathing. You can plant your feet on the ground and literally see roots anchoring you. This is better, not so much virtual, but you feel anchored and you remind yourself who's there and what they're there to learn. There's a whole process I take myself through. I do breathing specifically. There are voice exercises you can do to warm up your voice. Speaking of which,
got it.
a lot of speakers sound like they have mashed potatoes in their mouth and they don't really enunciate enough.
Cup of coffee, black coffee.
I exaggerated to make the point.
I was going to put some of these.
Stretch your mouth out and get those muscles going. Even if you look weird, you're supposed to look weird because you're stretching.
Warm it up, warm it up, warm it up.
Everyone stretches before they work out or whatever. You got to stretch your mouth. There's a ton of muscles in there, hundreds, in fact.
Say for me.
And use our whole mouth. I marvel at newscasters whose upper lip never moves. They're on the evening news that upper
right. I had a voice coach once. I was in Whistler, Canada. It was for a retreat that I was hosting, and the voice coach asked me to she gave me the challenge to spend 30 minutes. And when I spoke, I had to pretend like I was Gilbert Godfrey. Do you know what Gilbert Godfrey sounds like?
It's very annoying.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Sure, Jen.
I got up on the stage. I did a 4-minute presentation, like my intro, my raising my hands, all that, like this presentation that I knew, but I had to talk like this the entire time that I did my presentation. So I had to walk onto the stage and say, how many of you? And it was crazy. But after I did it, there was a part of my soft palate, there was a part of my throat that all of a sudden I felt this flexibility in. And also it was, of course, quite liberating to look like a complete weirdo on the stage talking like Gilbert Godfrey. But I've never forgot it, because when I don't warm up, I notice I stay in my natural range is kind of in here. And when I do vocal warm-ups, it's just this freeing feeling. I'm on stage where I can be loud, I can talk, I can express, and I can be serious and I can be quiet and, change the pitch and the tone and the pace. So highly, highly, highly recommend voice warm-up exercises if you're not currently using them.
Definitely. And there's all kinds of things you can search on Google. What was the one I just heard of? It's the yellow red one. I can't remember, but anyway, there are all kinds of things, and we definitely should warm up our voices. And you're exactly right there, Jen. It's a good point to get across, which is on stage, you want to be more dynamic than one-on-one in person. And it's like when you're on Zoom as well, because or TV, let's say you're being interviewed on TV even, the screen takes away at least 10% of your energy, your dynamic energy. So you will seem flatter. So you want to you don't want to go overboard, like, oh my gosh. No, you do have to have some animation to you, some zest, some dynamism. So yes, you want to explore your range. And like Jen said, not your everyday conversational range. You're having a glass of wine with a friend. No, this is a presentation range.
You get that voice warmed up.
And in addition to learning to enunciate better so that people can actually understand you, you want to be able to emote more. Sidebar, my husband and I were watching a movie or something. Thank God there's a DVR and you can pause. Even on Netflix, we'll go, what did he just say? I don't know. Went right by. Is there a sound person involved in this production at all?
I don't understand that thing you're saying, okay?
That said, oh, we didn't get that, because I mean, it got to the point, I'm not going to lie. And it's not because we're getting older. Maybe it is. I don't know. Once you put closed captioning on, because we missed so many of what they were saying because they fumble their words. They don't close them correctly. And it was just like, what was that? I don't know. I have no idea.
You're gonna get like those little
That's why we can't go to movies live anymore.
The other thing to say
Here's my point. Let's connect the dots.
okay,
Don't be
let's do
that person. You can't be that person on stage. You don't want people to miss a third of what you're trying to say, right?
Right.
So record yourself, listen back. Are you saying right or right? You know, you don't have to go right and exaggerate, but people have to know the words you're saying. So end every word. Don't blur them together, especially, by the way, if you have an international audience for whom English is not their first language. Like, how do you spell how's it going?
How do you spell how's it going?
Yeah. You can't. You're going to start to spell it with how is it going, but that's not what you said. You said how's it going?
How's it going?
How's it going?
No, but you can't have a lot of phrases we use like this. Like, what do you mean? Whaddya is spelled Whaddya, right? Whaddya. It's a made-up term.
I'm gonna go to the store. I'm gonna go.
So my point is, in international audiences for whom English is not their first language, it's gonna go right over them. Slow down, pronounce all the words so that they lock into what you're saying. And it's a good practice anyway to be able to articulate words, enunciate them properly. Older people, international audiences who are non-native English speakers, you want everybody to appreciate and receive everything that you're saying. Otherwise, what is the point at all?
I think it was Blessed Are the Cheesemakers.
Right?
Yeah.
If they're missing half of it. So, so important. Okay, so we're talking about prep.
Yep. I'll tell you a couple other things I do to prep. I will start with my script. This would be my short version overview of how I prep for a 2-hour presentation where I'm going to have slides. I will start with my script, have a script here. I will read it just to refresh my memory. I do not read it slowly, I should say. I go through it quickly so that I can just get into the flow of it and begin to see the chunks of the presentation. Then I will just look through my slides again, reasonably quickly, like slide, okay, got it, slide, got it. So now I've got the basic foundation of my script and my slides. Then I will go back and I will look at the slide and I'll read the script if the script needs, if it's longer than what's on the slide, or perhaps there's a story that is just implied on the slide. So I begin to patch the two together, to meld the two together so that when ultimately I see the slide, even if there are no presenter notes, I can have triggers for the stories or for the point of the slide. So I begin to meld them together, and ultimately leading up to the event, and I'll get there in about 3 days approximately, because that's how my timeline works. I will then ditch the script and rehearse just from the slides because that's what my real life situation is going to be like. Now, I may use presenter notes in the keynote or the PowerPoint.
And just so
mention that I don't need them.
Well, hang on, Jen. Just so everyone knows, that's the section that you can open up underneath the slide that you see, but your audience does not see. So if you have the luxury of an additional monitor where you can see your slides with the presenter notes on the bottom, it may toggle your memory of what you wanted to talk about. So that's what they're saying by presenter notes.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that clarification. So I may have initially, if let's say it's an absolutely new presentation to me altogether, and I'm like, okay, I have a short amount of time to get this done, to get it presentable where I can show up and feel like I'm present with the audience and I'm not thinking, oh gosh, what's the next slide? It's like split personalities, right? Like I'm thinking one thing, but I'm also talking at the same time. So if I need to get a new presentation done quickly, how I do it is I will actually take the entire section of the script and stick it in the presenter notes. And it's a lot. Like I'm not going to present that way. Ultimately, I will pair
for rehearsing it.
For
Is what you're-
rehearsing it. So then I don't have a piece of paper and slides. I can actually, I will still read my paper script. I will still look through my slides separately.
Yep.
Then if it's an absolutely new presentation, I take the entire notes that I have for that particular slide and I stick them in the presenter notes section, the hidden section of the slide. So that now I have one document and one place to go and rehearse. And then I just look for triggers and say, oh, I might only need one bullet point to set off a cascade of story point. And then I just begin to pare it down so that my intention is by the time I go live on stage, the notes that I have as my little, safety blanket or my safety net, maybe only one or two bullet points, and they can easily be seen on the separate monitor. The worst thing I think that can happen is that you lean too heavily on your hidden presenter notes and you show up, and I've had this happen, and the monitor that has your notes
No.
is like this big, and you're like, oh, I can't even
Like
see my
squinting, the
notes.
audience is wondering what you're looking at. Don't
I
be.
have so many notes on there, right? So it's good to pare it down to one or two bullet points that triggers the point, your point or your story for that slide that you might need guidance on. And ultimately, you probably won't need it, but it's a nice little safety net as long as you can read it when you get there.
Excellent. And I hope the takeaway here, well, let's just anchor it, is that you got to rehearse.
Mhm.
Don't wing it. One of the worst things you can do is wing it. And you lose track of what you're saying, the points you're trying to make, and the audience knows it. And they lose trust and faith in you. So be prepared, rehearse it many times. What are the points that are so important that you don't want to forget? And if you've gone over this several times, and why I'm feeling overwhelmed is I have 5 of these I have to prepare for. And it's like, I got to keep them straight. I got to remember what's in what. And sometimes it's difficult. This is an unusual situation, but usually most of us are just preparing for one presentation, maybe a presentation and a breakout workshop the next day or something. Hopefully it's related to the first one that you gave. And so it's not as difficult. It's just diving deeper. But the key here is rehearsal, preparation and rehearsal. And it's so important. You will come across as an expert. You will come across as knowledgeable and wise and everything that people are looking for. And usually we don't enjoy listening to people who are not telling us anything new. Listen to speakers because they're advancing our understanding, our desires, helping us fulfill our goals. There's something they're saying that's appealing to where we want to go. Okay, so remember that as well. Well, we could talk a lot. There's so much more to unpack when it comes to speaking and presenting. But since we're getting ready for this big event, we wanted to just share some of what we're doing, from storytelling to how to prep, how to rehearse, so that you can be as dynamic, excuse me, and as relevant and as impactful as you want to be each and every time you take the stage.
Thank you for that. Good. Yeah. I will tell you, like right now I'm at home. I'm going to be on a plane. I will pre-print my notes and take them with me so I can review. I will also, if I need to, make sure that my presentation is downloaded on my laptop so I can do a dry run through. On the plane to presenting is where I typically have my quietest time. I put in headphones. Maybe I don't play anything, but it just makes people don't talk to me then. And I drowns out any ambient noise. And I pretend like I'm presenting. So my lips are moving. I'm not talking, but I go through an entire dry run. I also time myself. Please time yourself. And I know we can talk about in more details of the nuance of presenting, but create spaciousness in your presentation and make sure you are on time. Personally, nothing makes me crazier than feeling like the presenter's going over and is oblivious to the fact that they're 20 minutes behind.
Is this thing ever gonna end?
So please have a look at that as well as you're preparing. And we can go deeper into this, of course, from questions, whether you email them in or submit them or show up on camera and ask.
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
No one ever complained for a speaker ending early. They usually complain when the speaker goes late. So
absolutely.
We'll take. All right. Thanks everyone for your viewing. Feel free to always send us your questions at debandjenshow.com. And yeah, if there are topics you want us to explore related to marketing, messaging, speaking, and sales and marketing, speaking and messaging, feel free to send them along and we'll hope to cover them in a future show. So see you next week. We'll be live in Charleston on a big virtual stage and we'll show you some behind the scenes. It'll be fun.
It's gonna be super fun. All right.